Hi, eighth graders. Today I tried another virtual background. You can see I'm at the beach. Uh, I thought this might be an appropriate background since our story takes place in California. I'm not sure that this really looks like a California beach, but we are going to continue today reading chapter 2. And I'd like you to have, if you received your book, get your book out. Otherwise, you can follow along with me when I read. And also have those questions handy. So I will also share those with you and we'll take a peek at the questions. All right, so we're looking at chapter 2 questions. There are 7 questions for this one. They are also on Schoology and on your flash drive. I know the file is long, just focus on one chapter at a time as we go here. I am going to have you submit chapters 1 and 2 together on Schoology. So chapter 2, the questions we see is number 1, before Papa was taken, the family lived in Ocean Park. After his arrest, Mama moved the family to Terminal Island. Let me move my little picture here. Why did she make the move? Was this a wise move? And why? So there's 3 questions really there. Why did they make the move? Was it wise? And explain why or why not that was a wise move. Question 2, why was Jeanne afraid of Oriental faces? And why is this fear now ironic? Now, Oriental is not a term that we really use anymore. It's kind of racial in itself, or prejudice in itself. The Oriental would be people of the Orient. So when she's saying that, it's really any Asian faces, being herself. So, Japanese, Chinese, anyone, or possibly Korean, that she is afraid of those. And then here's that question, why is that fear ironic? We have spent so much time this year talking about what is irony. I'm going to pause for a minute. Hopefully you can fill in the definition for me. When the opposite of what you expect to happen happens. We've talked about both verbal, dramatic, and situational irony. So in this case, Jeanne is Japanese and she's afraid. Got it? You figured it out before even going on, but you have to figure out why she's afraid of them too. So that's really a 2-part question. Make sure you answer both parts. Question 3, Jeanne and her brother Keo are threatened by the ghetto kids of Terminal Island who mock and intimidate them. Jeanne tells us none of these kids ever actually attacked. It was the threat that frightened us. Analyze this line in the larger context of World War II and what's happening in the nation at this time. So a couple of things here. Ghetto, we talked about that with when we were studying the Holocaust. So this type of ghetto was a little bit different. When we talked about the Holocaust, we knew that that was a section off part of the city where the Jews were forced to go live, and that they have, some of those situations were horrendous. They were, not caged in, but there might have been barbed wire or walls around them. They may or may not have been able to leave to go to work. In the sense of the word ghetto, that is still a section of the city where minorities or different groups congregate and decide to live together. So in this case, these ghetto kids of where they're living, these are probably other Japanese children as well. Okay, in what's happening in our world at that time, so, this is World War II, Pearl Harbor was just bombed. This has put our country into the war. We, as a nation, are afraid of what's happening with the Japanese, and they're starting to move them into the internment camps somewhat unfairly. Okay, question 4. When talking about her time living in the Terminal Island neighborhood, Jeanne tells us that it seemed we had been living under the reign of fear for years. In fact, we lived here about 2 months. What does this show us about the power of fear? Does time ever slow down or expand like this for you? Explain your thoughts on this idea, perhaps right now, as we are stuck at home and we're afraid to leave our homes. We're, because we could get sick. We are afraid for other people around us. Maybe you have a family member who is working in the healthcare field. Any of these fears that can compound on us can feel like time is slowing down and be worse. So if you have anything like that you can draw upon, add that into your answer. Number 5, explain what happens with Mama's china dishes. What does this incident show us about Mama? Symbolically, what might the dishes represent? So remember, in the last chapter, we learned about Papa. Papa has kept his dignity and his pride as he was being marched out by the officers to be arrested. Well, in this case, I can't tell you yet, but what does this particular incident with the dishes show us about Mama? And then remember symbolism. We haven't talked a lot about symbolism this year. We did it more last year. And symbolism is when an object will represent something else. So you have to think critically here. These dishes that she is doing something with, we'll find out in a little bit when we read it, what could that represent? Because maybe it's not the dishes that the incident is about. What else could they represent? Okay, number 6, and I apologize. I'm trying to keep this channel private so that hopefully nobody will tell me you are completely ruining how to say these Japanese words, because I honestly don't know. I'm kind of sounding them out in the American way, and I'm probably completely wrong. So number 6 asks, explain what shikata ganai means. And that is the title of our chapter. It will tell us as we read the chapter what it means, so you'll be able to put that down. Do you think this EC philosophy will help people or hurt them as they face the internment camps? So the shikata ganai is a phrase that the EC brought with them from Japan. When they come to the United States, so, they're using this particular term, and they're teaching this to their families. Is this going to be a good thing or not in this particular situation? Maybe earlier it was, maybe now it's not. And then question 7, what is the problem with the food? And once again, symbolically, what's interesting about this passage? What could the food represent? So a lot of things as far as representation beyond just what is there. I want to point this out too. I shared these pictures with you. This is one of the biggest reasons I shared this file in its entirety, is because I really like these pictures. So I'm not 100% sure where they came from. I really hope that they are vetted and can be here, because I noticed the teacher who put this together, who is Laura Randazza, she updated her file and the pictures are gone. And I was really kind of disappointed the pictures were gone, because these really add to our learning here. So we see our state's not even there, but this is the United States. The eastern half is cut off, and we see different kind of coloring here. So this outline with the peach color, I guess you would call it, is where the military zone was. So this is our military taking over and laying claim to all of the beaches and making sure that it is safe for our country. And the unfortunate part of that is that the fishermen and all those businesses and things that occurred along the beaches, those are being pushed away. So even if her father hadn't been arrested, he wouldn't have still been able to be making a living as a fisherman. And then we have the squares where we see these are the different internment camps that were here within our country, and put together pretty quickly and hastily. And actually they go all the way over here to Arkansas as well. The one that her family ends up in is Manzanar. That's this square right here. And you can see it's just outside of the military zone, yet still in California. All right, so those are the little pieces that I wanted to share with you. And now we're going to take a look at chapter 2. And if you would get your book out and read along with me, and especially if you have your book, feel free to set the screen aside and just listen to the audio, or even if you don't want to listen to me read it and you want to shut it off and read it on your own, you are certainly welcome to do that. Okay, so chapter 2, Shikata Ganai. In December of 1941, Papa's disappearance didn't bother me nearly so much as the world I found myself in. He had been a jack of all trades. When I was born, he was farming near Inglewood. Later, when he started fishing, we moved to Ocean Park near Santa Monica, and until they picked him up, that's where we lived, in a big frame house with a brick fireplace, a block back from the beach. We were the only Japanese family in the neighborhood. Papa liked it that way. He didn't want to be labeled or grouped by anyone. But with him gone and no way of knowing what to expect, my mother moved all of us down to Terminal Island. Woody already lived there, and one of my older sisters had married a Terminal Island boy. Mama's first concern now was to keep the family together. And once the war began, she felt safer there than isolated racially in Ocean Park. But for me, at age 7, the island was a country as foreign as India or Arabia would have been. It was the first time I had lived among other Japanese or gone to school with them, and I was terrified all the time. This was partly Papa's fault. One of his threats to keep us younger kids in line was, "I'm going to sell you to the Chinamen." When I had entered kindergarten 2 years earlier, I was the only Oriental in the class. They sat me next to a Caucasian girl who happened to have very slanted eyes. I looked at her and began to scream. Certainly Papa has sold me out at last. My fear of her ran so deep I could not speak of it, even to Mama. Couldn't explain why I was screaming. For 2 weeks I had nightmares about this girl until the teachers finally moved me to the other side of the room. And it was still with me, this fear of Oriental faces, when we moved to Terminal Island. In those days, it was a company town, a ghetto owned and controlled by the canneries. The men went after fish, and whenever the boats came back, day or night, the women would be called to process the catch while it was fresh. 1 in the afternoon or 4 in the morning, it made no difference. My mother had to go to work right after we moved there. I can still hear the whistle, 2 toots for French's, 3 for Van Camp's, and she and Chizu would be out of bed in the middle of the night heading for the cannery. The house we lived in was nothing more than a shack, a barracks with single plank walls and rough wooden floors, like the cheapest kind of migrant workers' housing. The people around us were hardworking, boisterous, a little proud of their nickname, Yogero, or Yogore, which meant literally uncouth one, or roughneck, or dead-end kid. They not only spoke Japanese exclusively, they spoke a dialect peculiar to Kyushu, where their families had come from in Japan, a rough fisherman's language full of oaths and insults. Instead of saying bakatere, a common insult meaning stupid, Terminal Islanders would say bakayaro, a coarser and exclusively masculine use of the word, which implies gross stupidity. They would swagger and pick on outsiders and persecute anyone who didn't speak as they did. That was what made my own time there so hateful. I had never spoken anything but English, and the other kids in the 2nd grade despised me for it. They were tough and mean, like ghetto kids anywhere. Each day after school, I dreaded their ambush. My brother Kyo, 3 years older, would wait for me at the door, where we would decide whether to run straight home together or split up or try a new and unexpected route. So let's just do some math. She's 7, he's 3 years older, so Kyo is 10. That's the same age as Colin. None of these kids ever actually attacked. It was the threat that frightened us, their fearful looks and the noises they would make, like miniature samurai in a language we couldn't understand. At the time, it seemed we had been living under this reign for years. In fact, we lived there about 2 months. Late in February, the Navy decided to clear Terminal Island completely, even though most of us were American born. It was dangerous having that many Orientals so close to Long Island Naval Station on the opposite end of the island. We had known nothing like this was coming, but like Papa's arrest, not much could be done ahead of time. There were 4 of us kids still young enough to be living with Mama, plus Granny, her mother, 65 then, speaking no English, and nearly blind. Mama didn't know where else she could get work, and we had nowhere else to move to. On February 25th, the choice was made for us. We were given 48 hours to clear out. The secondhand dealers had been prowling around for weeks like wolves, offering humiliating prices for goods and furniture they knew many of us would have to sell sooner or later. Mama had left all but her most valuable possessions in Ocean Park, simply because she had nowhere to put them. She had brought along her pottery, her silver heirlooms like the kimonos Granny had brought from Japan, tea sets, lacquered tables, and one fine old set of china. Blue and white porcelain, almost translucent. On the day we were leaving, Woody's car was so crammed with boxes and luggage and kids, we had just run out of room. Mama had to sell this china. One of the dealers offered her $15 for it. She said it was a full setting for 12 and worth at least 200. He said 15 was his top price. She had been packing all night and trying to calm down Granny, who didn't understand why we were moving again and what all the rush was about. Mama's nerves were shot, and now Navy Jeeps were patrolling the streets. She didn't say another word. She just glared at this man. All the rage and frustration channeled at him through her eyes. He watched her for a moment and said he was sure he couldn't pay more than $17.50 for that china. She reached into the red velvet case, took out a dinner plate, and hurled it at the floor right in front of his face. The man leapt back shouting, hey, don't do that. Those are valuable dishes. Mama took out another dinner plate and hurled it at the floor. Then another, and never moving, never opening her mouth, just quivering and glaring at the retreating dealer, with tears streaming down her cheeks. Her family turned and scuttled out the door, heading for the next house. Or he finally turned. When he was gone, she stood there, smashing cups and bowls and platters until the whole set lay in scattered blue and white fragments across the wooden floor. So I'm going to pause here just for a minute for you to think about what just happened. So they're being forced out of their home. They're given 48 hours, 2 days to get out. So she's been frantically packing things up so that they can move again because they're not allowed to stay on the beach, on the shore, where they are. And the china is not going to fit. There are men who are coming around to buy things off of people, and they're not giving good prices because they know people have to sell. Well, you see the difference in price. This is special, something that, it's worth a lot of money, at least $200 at the time, and he's offering her $15. Not fair at all. And she's at this point where she is so angry, she is going to smash it on the floor rather than sell it to him at this horrible price. What could those dishes represent? So think about all of the things that are happening at the time, and what do we learn about Mama as far as the way that she reacts in this frustration, and what do those dishes represent as she smashes and throws each one on the ground? And as my arm's disappearing as I move it. That's what happens with the virtual background. All right, we're going to continue to read it on page 15 here. The American Friends Service helped us find a small house in Boyle Heights, another minority ghetto in downtown Los Angeles, now inhabited briefly by a few hundred Terminal Island refugees. As Executive Order 9066 had been signed by President Roosevelt, giving the War Department authority to define military areas in the western states and to exclude them from anyone who might threaten the war effort. There was a lot of talk about internment or moving inland or something like that in store for all Japanese Americans. I remember my brothers sitting around the table talking very intently about what we were going to do, how they would keep the family together. They had seen how quickly Papa was removed, and they knew now that he would not be back for quite a while. Just before leaving Terminal Island, Mama had received her first letter from Bismarck, North Dakota. He had been imprisoned at Fort Lincoln in an all-male camp for enemy aliens. Papa had been the patriarch, the head of their family. He had always decided everything in the family. With him gone, my brothers, like counselors in the absence of a chief, worried about what should be done. The ironic thing is, there wasn't much left to decide. These were mainly days of quiet, desperate waiting for what seemed at the time to be inevitable. There is a phrase the Japanese use in such situations, when something difficult must be endured. You would hear the older heads, the EC, telling others very quietly, "Shikata ganai." It cannot be helped. "Shikata ganai." It must be done. Mama and Woody went to work packing celery for a Japanese produce dealer. Kyo and my sister May and I enrolled in the local school. And what sticks in my memory from those weeks is the teacher, not her looks, her remoteness. In Ocean Park, my teacher had been a kind, grandmotherly woman who used to sail with us in Papa's boat from time to time, and who wept the day we had to leave. In Boyle Heights, the teacher felt cold and distant. I was confused by all the moving and was having trouble with the classwork, but she would never help me out. She would have nothing to do with me. This was the first time I had felt outright hostility from a Caucasian. Looking back, it is easy enough to explain. Public attitudes towards the Japanese in California were shifting rapidly. In the first few months of the Pacific War, America was on the run. Tolerance had turned to distrust and irrational fear. The 100-year-old tradition of anti-Orientalism on the West Coast soon resurfaced, more vicious than ever. Its results became clear about a month later when we were told to make our third and final move. The name Manzanar meant nothing to us when we left Boyle Heights. We didn't know where it was or what it was. We went because the government ordered us to. And in the case of my older brothers and sisters, we went with a certain amount of relief. They had all heard stories of Japanese homes being attacked, of beatings in the streets of California towns. They were as frightened of the Caucasians as Caucasians were of us. Moving under what appeared to be government protection to an area less directly threatened by the war seemed not such a bad idea at all. For some, it actually sounded like a fine adventure. Our pickup point was a Buddhist church in Los Angeles. It was very early and misty when we got there with our luggage. Mama had bought heavy coats for all of us. She grew up in Eastern Washington and knew that anywhere inland in early April would be cold. I was proud of my new coat, and I remember sitting on a duffel bag trying to be friendly with the Greyhound driver. I smiled at him. He didn't smile back. He was befriending no one. Someone tied a number tag to my collar and to the duffel bag. Each family was given a number, and that became our official designation until the camps were closed. Someone else passed out box lunches for the trip, and we climbed aboard. I had never been outside Los Angeles County, never traveled more than 10 miles from the coast, had never even ridden on a bus. I was full of excitement, the way any kid would be, and wanted to look out the window. But for the first few hours, the shades were drawn. Around me, other people played cards, read magazines, dozed, waiting. I settled back, waiting too, and finally fell asleep. The bus felt very secure to me. Almost half its passengers were immediate relatives. Mama and my older brothers had succeeded in keeping most of us together on the same bus, headed for the same camp. I didn't realize until much later what a job that was. The strategy had been, first, to have everyone living in the same district when the evacuation began, and then to get all of us included under the same family number, even though names had been changed by marriage. Many families weren't as lucky as ours and suffered months of anguish while trying to arrange transfers from one camp to another. We rode all day. By the time we reached our destination, the shades were up. It was late afternoon. The first thing I saw was a yellow swirl across a blurred reddish setting sun. The bus was being pelted by what sounded like splattering rain. It wasn't rain. This was my first look at something I would soon know very well. A billowing flurry of dust and sand churned up by the wind through Owens Valley. We drove past a barbed wire fence, through a gate, and into an open space where trunks and sacks and packages had been dumped from the baggage trucks that drove out ahead of us. I could see a few tents set up, the first row of black barracks, and beyond them, blurred by sand, rows of barracks that seemed to spread for miles across this plain. People were sitting on cartons or milling around with their backs to the wind, waiting to see which friends or relatives might be on this bus. As we approached, they turned or stood up, and some moved toward us expectantly. But inside the bus, no one stirred. No one waved or spoke. They just stared out the windows, ominously silent. I didn't understand this. Hadn't we finally arrived? Our whole family intact. I opened a window, leaned out, and yelled happily, "Hey, this whole bus is full of Wakasukis!" Outside, the greeters smiled. Inside, there was an explosion of laughter, hysterical, tension-breaking laughter that left my brothers choking and whacking each other across the shoulders. We had pulled up just in time for dinner. The mess halls weren't complete yet. An outdoor chow line snaked around a half-finished building that broke a good part of the wind. They issued us Army mess kits, the round metal kind that fold over and plopped in scoops of canned Vienna sausage, canned string beans, steamed rice that had been cooked too long, and on top of the rice, a serving of canned apricots. The Caucasian servers were thinking that the fruit poured over rice would make a good dessert. Among the Japanese, of course, rice is never eaten with sweet foods, only with salty or savory. I lost my spot. Foods. Few of us could eat such a mixture, but at this point, no one dared protest. It would have been impolite. I was horrified when I saw the apricot syrup seeping through my little mound of rice. I opened my mouth to complain. My mother jabbed me in the back to keep quiet. We moved on through the line and joined the others squatting in the lee of half-raised walls, dabbing courteously at what was, for almost everyone there, an inedible concoction. After dinner, we were taken to Block 16, a cluster of 15 barracks that had just been finished a day or so earlier, although finished was hardly the word for it. The shacks were built on one thickness of pine planking covered with tar paper. They sat on concrete footings with about 2 feet of open space between the floorboards and the ground. Gaps showed between the planks, and as the weeks passed and the green wood dried out, the gaps widened. Knotholes gaped in the uncovered floor. Each barracks was divided into 6 units, 16 by 20 feet, about the size of a living room, with one bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, an oil stove for heat, and an oil stove for heat. We were assigned 2 of these for 12 people in our family, and our official family number was enlarged by 3 digits, 16 plus the number of this barracks. We were issued steel Army cots, 2 brown Army blankets each, and some mattress covers, which my brother stuffed with straw. The first task was to divide up what space we had for sleeping. Bill and Woody contributed a blanket each and partitioned off the first room, one side for Bill and Tommy, one side for Woody and Chizu, and their baby girl. Woody also got a stove for heating formulas. The people who had it hardest during the first few months were young couples like these, many of whom had married just before the evacuation began in order not to be separated and sent to different camps. Our 2 rooms were crowded, but at least it was all in the family. My oldest sister and her husband were shoved into one of these 16 by 20 foot compartments with 6 people they had never seen before. 2 other couples, one recently married like themselves, the other with 2 teenage boys, partitioning off a room like that wasn't easy. It was bitter cold when we arrived, and the wind did not abate. All they had to use for room dividers were those army blankets, 2 of which were barely enough to keep one person warm. They argued over whose blanket should be sacrificed, and later argued about noise at night. The parents wanted their boys asleep by 9 p.m., and they continued arguing over matters like that for 6 months, until my sister and her husband left to harvest sugar beets in Idaho. It was grueling work up there, and wages were pitiful. But when the call came through camp for workers to alleviate the wartime labor shortage, it sounded better than their life at Manzanar. They knew they'd have, if anything else, a room, perhaps a cabin of their own. The first night in Block 16, the rest of us squeezed into the second room. Granny, Lillian, age 14, Ray, 13, May, 11, Keo, 10, Mama, and me. I didn't mind this at all at the time. Being youngest meant, hang on one second, please. I'm so sorry for that short interruption. I'm sure your home lives are kind of crazy right now, I was just interrupted and I wanted to pause the video and come right back. We are almost done. All right, so where was I? 9 p.m. Okay, oh, we're in the very last paragraph. The first night in Block 16, the rest of us squeezed into the second room. Granny, Lillian, age 14, Ray, 13, May, 11, Keo, 10, Mama, and me. I didn't mind this at all at the time. Being youngest meant I got to sleep with Mama. And before we went to bed, I had a great time jumping up and down on the mattress. The boys had stuffed so much straw into hers. We had to flatten it some so we wouldn't slide off. I slept with her every night after that until Papa came back. So that is the end of chapter 2, and we're going to wrap up our lesson here. Just wanted to peek quickly at the questions again. So it did tell us specifically, it actually gave 2 kind of definitions of a shikata ganai. Make sure you explain those. And then the problem with the food, that would be the food that they had in the mess hall. And why did they consider that to be inedible? And then also, what could that represent symbolically, the fact that they've messed up that food and that they're unable to eat it, etc. What could that represent? All right, there's the end of lesson 2 for chapter 2. Please make sure you write out your answers in an ACE format. Answer, restate the question into your answer. Give me some kind of a text detail, whether it's specific or a quote, and then you're also explaining it. And any questions that have more than one question in it, make sure you cover all parts. Please make sure that you submit chapter 1 and 2 together, preferably to Schoology, or you can take a picture and either email it to me or send it to me on Remind. Have a great day.